Hello, heroes. Joe Smith here. In honor of the late great Paul Harvey, here is Joe Smith's version of the rest of the story in radio style, just like Paul Harvey would have done. Perhaps you know the story. One of the greatest baseball players to ever live and played baseball in America. His Major League Baseball career had a batting average of 284, 2781 hits, 630 home runs, 1,836 RBIs, and spanned the period of 4 calendar decades. He was a 13-time All-Star, American League MVP, 10-time Gold Glove Award winner, 7-time Silver Slugger Award winner, National League Comeback Player of the Year, 4-time American League Home Run Leader, American League RBI Leader. He's in the Baseball Hall of Fame for 2 different baseball teams, and he made the list of the Major League Baseball All-Century team. But maybe you don't know how he almost died before any of this ever happened, before his baseball career ever started in the first place. That's right. One of the most iconic baseball players of all time almost never played baseball because he almost died prior to even starting. And this is the rest of the story. Today's episode of The Rest of the Story is brought to you by heroes like you. All you heroes and friends of Joe Smith that keep watching, subscribing, posting comments, liking, sharing, giving Joe Smith encouragement. Many heroes, too many lists to list. 7 Wonders, Kingpin, a couple good friends of Joe Smith. MK Joe, Memorabilia Collector, Tool Bear, Gunpowder Beauty, Barb, all the people on the gun channels, all the people on tool channels, all the people on the truck channels, all the people on the baseball card channels, all the people on the Harbor Freight channels, everyone out there. This video, or this story, this radio style story, is brought to you by you, for you. Thank you. Born November 21st, 1969, George Jr. His family would later move to Cincinnati, Ohio, where his dad played for the Cincinnati Reds at the time. Growing up, George played football as wide receiver and even received football scholarships from schools like Oklahoma and Michigan. He would go on to be the first round, number 1 overall selection during the Major League Draft. The first team he played for in 11 seasons, he racked up 1,752 hits, 398 home runs, 1,152 RBIs, 167 bases stolen, and he led the American League in home runs for 4 seasons. He was voted the American League MVP 1 year and maintained a .297 career batting average. His defense in center field was widely considered the standard of elite fielding during the decade, exemplified by a streak of 10 straight Gold Gloves. He dazzled fans, made impressive catches. He featured on Wheaties cereal box, and even became one of the first baseball players to get his own signature sneaker line from Nike. In 1990 and 91, George Jr. and his dad became the first Major League Baseball players to play on the same team. August 31st, 1990, the pair hit back-to-back singles in the first inning and both scored. On September 14th of the same year, the pair hit back-to-back home runs in top of the first off California Angels pitcher Kirk McCaskill, becoming the first father-son duo to ever hit back-to-back home runs in Major League Baseball ever. The duo played total 51 games together before George Sr. retired in June of 1991. At the MLB Home Run Derby in 1993, George Jr. in Oriole Park in Baltimore was the first person to hit the warehouse beyond the right field wall, and is still the only player to ever do so. Just like with every player to hit a home run outside the park on Utah Street, the place where each one landed is embedded with a plaque. 1994, he led the league in voting for All-Star Game selection. That season, which ended prematurely on August 2nd due to a labor dispute, George Jr. hit 30 home runs in his first 65 games. He would go on to have 4 multi-home run games that year. One of the most memorable moments of George Jr.'s career came during the 1995 American League Division Series, the ALDS, against New York Yankees. After losing the first 2 games, George Jr. and his team were on the verge of elimination, but came back to win the next 2 games, setting up a decisive 5th game in the bottom of the 11th inning of Game 5. George Jr. on first base, teammate Edgar Martinez hit a double. George Jr. raced around the bases and slid into home with the winning run and popped up into the waiting arms of the entire team. The 1995 American League Division Series would kick off a brief rivalry between George Jr.'s team and the Yankees. George Jr. would become one of the most memorable players of the year. In 1997, George Jr. led the Mariners to the American League West crown and captured the American League Most Valuable Player of the Year, hitting .304 with 56 home runs and 147 RBIs. The next season, uh, was season followed by the media was George Jr., Mark McGwire, and Sammy Sosa all competed to try and beat Roger Maris's famous home run record of 61. While George Jr. played with his first team, he was a 10-time American League Gold Glove winner, 1992 All-Star Game MVP, 1997 American League MVP, 1998 SB co-winner for Male Athlete of the Year, 1999 Players' Choice Awards Player of the Decade by the players, and was named to the All-Century team in 1999. After getting married and having kids, he decided to move back closer to his hometown and was traded to the Cincinnati Reds. In which he wore number 30, the same number that his dad wore years prior with the team. 2005-2006 time frame. George Jr. ended the season tied with Mickey Mantle after passing Jimmy Fox, Ted Williams, Willie McCovey, Ernie Banks, Eddie Matthews, Mel Ott, and Eddie Murray with home runs. During the second game of the 2006 regular season, George Jr. hit home run number 537, surpassing Mickey Mantle for 12th on the all-time list. On June 5th, George Jr. tied Fred McGriff's record by hitting home run in his 43rd different ballpark at the St. Louis Cardinals Busch Stadium. On June 19th, George Jr. hit career home run 548, tying him with Mike Schmidt, and then 6 days later passed Schmidt with 549. On June 27th, he hit his 550th career home run against the Kansas City Royals. On September 25th, 2006, George Jr. his 27th home run of the season against Chicago Cubs pitcher Scott Iyer to tie Reggie Jackson for 10th on the all-time home run list. May 10th, 2007, George Jr. hit his 6th home run of the season and the 569th of his career, tying Rafael Palmeiro for 9th place on the career home run list. He passed Palmeiro on May 13. George Jr. tied Harmon Killebrew for 8th on the all-time list, hitting his 573rd career home run on May 22nd. He then surpassed Harmon on May 25th, 3 days later. George Jr. received the most votes of any player in the National League for the 2007 All-Star balloting. On July 16th, 2007, George Jr. hit his 587th home run to pass Frank Robinson for 6th place on the all-time home run list. On July 18th, 2007, George Jr. had his 25th 100 hit, a first inning single off John Smoltz with the Atlanta Braves. September 19th, 2007, George Jr. in a game against the Chicago Cubs fielded a Derek Lee single in right field, and then suddenly went down in pain. Injury. uh, would knock him out for several games, and he would go on to suffer from many other injuries that would eventually shorten his career, knock him out for many games each year. Or 2008, April 4th, 2008, George Jr. passed Reggie Jackson for a 16th on the all-time list after driving in his 1702nd RBI on June 9th. George Jr. his 600th home run on a pitch from Mark Hendrickson of the Florida Marlins. In Landshark Stadium, Miami, Florida, fans of both teams gave George Jr. a standing ovation. July 30th, 2008, George Jr. would hit his 608th career home run in his very last game he played for the Reds, because George Jr. was thinking about retirement but wanted to go back to the team where he started his career to end his career. After retirement, or during time that George Jr. played baseball, he's featured in several TV shows, movies, even music videos. He was in a 1991 episode of Harry and the Hendersons, 1992 episode of The Simpsons, 1994 episode of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, 1994 he was in Little Big League, 2001 Summer Catch, 2015 he's in a Macklemore music video, and 2020 in Super Intelligence. As great of a player and person as George Jr. was, this kid almost never accomplished any of this, because this kid almost never even had a chance to start his career. Because in January 1988, the kid, George Jr., at the age of 18, attempted to commit suicide by swallowing 277 aspirin pills and wound up in intensive care in the Providence Hospital in Mount Airy, Ohio. The kid, George Jr., said he did it because he was having arguments with his father, George Sr., was suffering from depression and anger issues, and that was the reasons for his suicide attempt. George Jr. stated, "It seemed like everyone was yelling at me trying to play baseball in the minors, and then I came home and everyone was yelling at me there. I got depressed. I got angry. I didn't want to live," the kid went on to say. He stated that he had also previously contemplated taking his own life, but he had not acted on until this instant. The kid, George Jr., after swallowing the aspirin, was driven to the hospital by his girlfriend's mother. While in intensive care, the kid ripped the IV from his arm in order to stop an argument between him and his father. Both George Jr. and George Sr. said that the incident forever changed their relationship for the better, and there's now more understanding on both sides. "1989 saw a new baseball card company come onto the market to compete with Fleer, Topps, and Donruss by offering thicker cardstock, glossy finish on both sides, and higher quality card to start a new trend and usher in a new era in baseball card collecting. Upper Deck, with their inaugural 1989 premier baseball card set, took a huge gamble and decided that they would have the kid George Jr. rookie card be number one card number one of the set. This card would become one of the most iconic cards of the 90s, and to this date is still one of the most iconic and memorable baseball cards of all time. Thank God the kid's suicide attempt failed, and George Jr. would go on to play baseball and have this wonderful career. His son would later be drafted by the team that he started and finished with in the 24th round overall draft, even though his son would not play baseball but would go on to play football in the NFL. The draft in the 24th round was more of a symbolic draft to honor George Jr.'s retired number 24 with the Seattle Mariners. And in 2016, the National Baseball Hall of Fame, with a record 99.3% voting to induct him, chose to induct the kid George Kenneth Griffey Jr. into the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And now you know the rest of the story. It's been Joel Smith. Good day.